All right, Shavosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. All right, begin by thanking all of us. I'm sorry, just make sure everything is set up over here. Good. Just begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank Paul, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this month as a schus for refuah shlema of Kathy's sister Dana Baker Matson, as well as by Rabbi Aryeh and Chana Richter in the schus for refuah shlema for Eliana Necha Bas Rachel. We hope that they will have a continued refuah besoch shar choli Yisrael. But with that, let us begin. So, first of all, so some of you still may remember when we were housed in these humble beginnings, Baruch Hashem. Actually, I think when we started the last cycle of Daf Yomi, right before the pandemic hit, right? We started, I think, we were set up the other direction, right? Where we went out that way. And Baruch Hashem, as much as it's beautiful that we're in the shul now, there's something beautifully cozy and very special about kind of coming back to our roots. As someone just pointed out, who was just talking about? Alan was just the real roots of the shir. All right, this is good and build up for our 66th anniversary dinner, right? And real beings are back in the small base measure. Some of you may not even know. Down the stairs in the back, there's a base measure. There's a base measure, Baruch Hashem. So today, thank God, it's not really usable for our shiurim, but that's actually where it really all began. Even before it was Daf Yomi, we had an Amid Yomi shir over there, Baruch Hashem, with some really very, very, very special people. Mr. Nabanzi, Zichron Livracha, Mr. Mervite, Zichron Livracha, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Bamgart, Baruch Hashem, I think a number of other... Mr. Kozlovsky. So Baruch Hashem, a lot of survivors and just really a different generation, very, very special people, Baruch Hashem, who many of you may not even know, but who are really responsible for kind of jump-starting a lot of the learning that we have today. Started with that very small chevra. Okay, so it's a great schos, Baruch Hashem, and thank you to Maishi and to Menachem for getting everything set up in here as well. Mostly with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Chav Ches 28, and we are picking up on Chav Ches Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. Hamevi, yes. Also, I have not forgotten that I still owe you the Rambam from yesterday. Let's first kind of go through today's Gemara, and then Meretz Hashem will circle back to the Rambam a little bit later. Some very interesting cases today. Hamevi get v'nichu zakin acholas. Well, so here's the case. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven is also divorcing Rachel. So what does Reuven do? He sends the get. Reuven is overseas. He sends the get with a shaliach to Rachel. Only one issue. Reuven is very old. So we'll say, so what's the issue over here? So now Reuven sends the get with a shaliach. What the shaliach is always concerned about is Reuven still alive? Right? That's the shayla. Is Reuven still alive or not? So he maybe get v'nichu zakin ochola. So a person went ahead, so right, the shaliach delivered the get, and he left the husband behind hers, but the husband was very old or very sick. No sin la bechaska shukayim. Ultimately, again, the shaliach could deliver the get under the assumption with the chazaka that the husband is still alive. So both say, so that's essentially what the Mishnah is conveying to us. That halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and give a get with the assumption that the husband is still alive. Good. Basi Yisrael Nesul HaKohen. Valach Bailam Dinasem. So we'll say first, I'll take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, No stin la becheska shukayim, v'lo chayshinan shema meis. We don't have to be concerned that maybe the husband died. Ubatal shlichuso. And ultimately, again, the shlichus is void, because obviously we'll say if the husband is dead, there's no longer any kind of shlichus. Umidaraisa nafkalan bakol shochtin ha'emid lo davar achas kasas. We'll also talk about this. The concept of chazaka is a da'oraisa concept. Da'oraisa concept has biblical origins. So we'll say that's halacha number 1. Halacha 2. Bas Yisrael Nesul HaKohen. Balach Bailam Dinasem. Suppose it's the following case. Bas Yisrael. Let's do it the same case. Rachel is married to Reuven, but in this case over here, Reuven is a Kohen. As a result of being married to a Kohen, Rachel is able to eat truma. Now what happens? Reuven goes on a business trip. Right? Reuven goes on a business trip, and I was saying, so now what's the shayla? Rachel wants to know, can she continue to go ahead and eat truma, or halacha l'maisa, does she have to be concerned that maybe her husband died and therefore she no longer has that same entitlement? So that says, she could continue to eat truma becheskas shukayim. Ultimately, again, with the chazaka that her husband, her kohanic husband, is still alive. Good. Next. Hashaliach chatasan medinas hayam. But say third case. I'm living overseas, right? I'm living overseas, but I want to send a carbon to the Beis Hamikdash. I want to send the carbon chatos. So I'll say, so what happens? So Beis Hamikdash receives an overseas delivery of a carbon chatos. Makrivin also bechazka shukayim. So we'll say, so now the shaila is what? Can they offer up this carbon in the Beis Hamikdash, or do we have to be concerned that maybe the owner died? Maybe the owner died. And I will say, obviously, you cannot offer up an ownerless carbon. So I will say, so therefore, again, the Mishnah says, you can go ahead and offer up the carbon with the chazaka that the owner is still alive. So I will say, so what do you see from here? What you see from here, Allah is three cases, right? First case is get, second case is truma, third case is carbon, but ultimately the principle is the same, which is, we are not choshish for misa. We don't assume people died. There's a chazaka that a person is living, and that chazaka remains intact until we definitively know otherwise. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Amarava, Lo shana elazakin shlagil gvuros. So let's listen to this. When do we assume that halacha l'maisa, a person has what we call a cheskas chai, that a person has a chazaka that they're alive? That's only talking about an older person who has not reached the level of gvuros. I will say, what's gvuros? Rashi says over here, shmonim shana. Shmonim shana. That's only that you haven't reached 80. Haven't reached 80, however, furthermore, v'chola sharov cholim l'chaim. So we'll say, when do we say that even if a person is elderly, we assume that they are alive? Or as well say that we assume that they remain alive, so to speak. And when do we assume that even if a person is ill, that we assume that they remain alive? So for an old person, that's only assuming they have not reached 80. And for cholim, ultimately, again, that it's a regular chola. Avazakin she'egil legvuros. But I will say, if you have an elderly person who has reached the age of 80, the goses, and I will say, and the sick person we're talking about is a goses. Remember again, a goses, I will say, is a person who is facing imminent death. Then ultimately, again, rov goses in lemisa lo. So we'll say, so this is actually very interesting. So the Rava wants to suggest over here that halacha l'maisa, this concept that a person has a chazaka that they are alive has limitations. Right? So in the realm of age, the limitation ultimately again is up till the age of 80. Up till the age of 80. But once a person gets to the age of 80, we don't assume that there is a cheskas chaim. That's number one. Number two, when we say that a person who's ill has a chazaka that they're alive, that's a stam choli. A regular is illness. But a goses, I will say, a goses is a different type of situation. Then they don't have a cheskas chaim. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, Eisve Abaye, so Abaye raised the kasha, Hamevi get, Vianiach zakin, Afilu ben mea shana. I will say, here's what's very interesting. It's very interesting. If you notice, again, I will say, so Abaye is raising a kasha from a braisa. The braisa has a slightly different girsa than the Mishnah. Right? So what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, Hamevi get, Vianicho zakin. Right? If again, Shaliach is bringing a get. He left behind Ruvain, right? Ruvain's the husband, and Ruvain was old. So what did the Mishnah say? That the Shaliach could give the get under the assumption that halacha l'maisa, the husband is still alive. But let's see, if you notice, the Braisa has a slight twist. What's the slight twist of the Braisa? Shaliach took the get, left the husband, right, delivering the get on behalf of the husband, even if the husband is 100 years old. No sin law, becheskas shukayim. Right? So we'll say, again, so the 100-year-old guy is giving his wife a get. By the way, what a musser. It's never too late for a new start. Right? In other words, we'll say, right, Salamaisa again, he's like, you know what, we've done this for so long already, right? It's not working for either of us, right? Let's, right, so I'll say, so let's go ahead, and all kidding aside, of course, you could have a 100-year-old who's giving a get, because again, if Rahman they don't have children, he doesn't want a yibum situation, right? Doesn't want the yibum situation for his wife. In any event, so we'll say, what's the point? The The point over here is the Bryce explicitly says that halacha l'maisa, even if the husband is 100 years old, we could still have the shaliach give the get, which shows you, we'll say, again, is obviously a case past 80. Even in a case past 80, the get could still be given with the chazaka, ultimately that the husband is still alive. To which the Gemara says, Tiyufta. Indeed, this is a refutation of Rava's position. So and you see from here that Rava's statement is incorrect. That it really doesn't matter how old the husband is. If the husband commissions the giving of the get, the shaliach has the ability to execute the agency with the assumption that the husband is still alive. Now, the Gemara gives a different answer. By assuming that possibility is kevan de iflig. So we'll say this is interesting. The other possibility we'll say is there are exceptions. And once you demonstrate yourself to be an exception, so you kind of remove yourself from the general pool. Take a look at Rashi. Kevan de iflig. Rashi says, Mishar derech kala aretz, sherech yam me'ashar. We'll say, most people don't live until 100. So by definition, if you differentiate yourself, Baruch Hashem, as being different than the general pool, as evidenced by the fact that you are over 80 years old, then what? Iflig. Then you're separate. Rashi says, Ve'ino kishar ha'adam lios karov lamos aval ben shmonim va'achos o yoser atishim karov lamosu. So I will say this second answer is very interesting. The second answer I will say is like this: no, maybe Rav is correct. Which means past the age of 80, you can no longer go ahead and simply rely on a cheskas chai, on a chazaka that a person is alive. Because we'll say once a person reaches the age of gvuros, again, it's hard to say if there's a chazaka that they're going to remain alive. But rather, the Gemara says, but once a person becomes such a dramatic outlier, i.e., you're 100 years old, so the Maisa will say, essentially, you're kind of in a category of your own. And interestingly enough, I will say, once you go and you separate yourself from that category of 80-year-olds, then the Maisa, you could actually restore your chazkas chai. So quite an interesting answer. Kevan de iflig. So I will say, we have this concept like this, that essentially what chazaka says is, we'll say, what does chazaka operate on? Chazaka operates on the norm. I will say, does chazaka recognize that there are outliers to chazaka? Of course. So the Gemara seems to be saying is, once you differentiate yourself as an outlier, einachinami, again, perhaps the chazaka as we know it doesn't apply to you, or the chazaka is reinstated. Kevan de iflig, which I will say is also such a profound yesod, which is, although there are certain realities which govern the norms of human behavior, right, and there are certain realities that create a chazaka, kevan de iflig. If you want to separate yourself, and you want to go ahead and swim against the current, and want to differentiate or carve out something different for yourself, you have the ability to do so. In Achinami, there may be a certain chazaka, and things may unfold a particular way. But if you want something different for yourself in life, there is the ability to do that. So I will say, so bottom line, here's what we have. We have a Mishnah that says that if Reuven is very old, gives a get to the shaliach to deliver to Rachel, the shaliach has the ability to execute the agency based on the assumption that Reuven, the husband, is still alive. Rava comes along and says, well, there's a cap on that. What's the cap on that? That Reuven's not exceedingly old. Exceedingly old is defined by 80 and above. But yet there seems to be an exception to that as well. If someone has reached a significantly advanced age, like 100, then Einachinami, again, their cheskas chai may be reinstated again, since they've clearly separated themselves ultimately from the norm. Fine. V'ramile Abaye the Rabba. So we'll say, Abaye raised the question to Rabba. So Tanan, we learned, Hamevi get v'nicho zakin ochola, no sin lo becheskas shukayim. So we'll say, that's our Mishnah. Reuven is old. He gives a get to the shaliach to go ahead and deliver to his wife. Ultimately, again, the shaliach has the ability to deliver the get based on the chazaka that Reuven is still alive. Fine. Or minhu, Gemara raised the question, so we'll say it's very interesting. Watch this case. Reuven is married to Rachel. Right, in this case, Reuven is a Kohen. So what does he do? He gives her a get. And he says, listen, the get's not chal now, but I want this get to be chal to take effect 1 hour or 1 moment before I die. All right, so we'll see now, watch this. So remember again, how does a get like that work? That's a retroactivity clause, right? So what that does is, when Reuven does die, the get is retroactively activated an hour before his death, or whatever, a moment before Shad, could mean an hour, it doesn't really matter. Before my death, before his death, right? That's the chap. So we'll say, so now what's the halacha? Now we'll say, assuming that Reuven is a Kohen, asura le'achal b'truma, miyad, she can't eat truma. That was very interesting. Why can't she eat truma? Why can't she eat truma? Because we're concerned that what? We're concerned that what? What are we concerned about? That he's going to die, right? And if he dies and she's eating truma in our bus, in other words, what we're concerned about is like this: if we allow her to eat truma, then he could die. He could die, and then it turns out that retroactively, at the time that she was eating truma, she wasn't really allowed to do so, right? She really wasn't married to the Kohen anymore. So we'll see, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, we are choshesh for death. See what I was saying? The whole chap in the Mishnah is that the agent could go ahead and deliver the get even though he knows the husband is very old. Why? Because we're not in choshesh l'misa. We're not choshesh that someone died. Someone is alive, they have a chazakah that they're alive until we know definitively otherwise. So therefore, agent has the ability to deliver the get based on the assumption that husband is still alive. Yet, what do you see from this case over here? You see in this case over here that when husband gives his wife the get and says, the get will be chal 1 moment before I die, we don't let her eat truma now. Now already, why? Because we're choshesh that he's going to die. So, which one is it? Look at Rashi will say. Rashi says over here, Asura le'achol, Rashi says, Bas Yisrael hanasura le'kohen, shochalas b'shvilo, asura miyad, she's not allowed to eat truma as soon as she receives that get. Why? Because also you see, we're constantly preoccupied with the possibility that in fact she is going to die. That he is going to die and activate the get. So also this contradicts the Mishnah. So Amalei, so he says back to him. So also, so Rabbah says back to Abaye. Amalei, Truma agin karamis. First of all, it's not a kasha. You're bringing up a case of Truma. I'm just talking about Gittin. You're bringing up a case of Truma. Truma efshar get lo efshar. So we'll say, here's the difference. In the case of Truma, fine. In other words, there is a way to deal with this concern without making her life difficult. In other words, so don't eat Truma. There's other food. There's other food available. So therefore, I will say, again, in order to ameliorate this concern, we'll tell her, don't eat Truma. So we'll say, you can get by without Truma. But I will say, there is absolutely no way for shlichus to function if you have to be choshesh that the husband died. I will say, if we say lemisa chashinon, if we actually subscribe to this idea that you have to be concerned that what? That people die, and that people die regularly, then I will say there is no such thing as agency for get. Why is there no such thing as agency for get? Because a shaliach can never go ahead and deliver a get on behalf of someone, because he would have to be concerned that the principal, i.e. the husband, has died. So there's no way for agency for get to work if you're choshesh for misa. By truma, just let her eat something else and she'll be fine. To which the Gemara says, "Varami truma." Well, fine. Well, I'll bring up a contradiction from truma to truma. We'll say, watch this. Tanan, Bas Yisrael hanasua lekohen. So we'll say, what do we learn in our Mishnah? We'll say this is case number 2 in the Mishnah. What was case number 2 in the Mishnah? A Bas Yisrael is married to a Kohen, and therefore we'll say she's allowed to eat truma. Fahalach ba'ila lemedina sayam. And her husband went ahead and went overseas. Okales b'truma, she's allowed to eat truma. Becheskas shukayim. And we'll say, why could she continue to eat truma? Why? Under the assumption that he's still alive. So I'll say, or minu, Gemara is the kasha. Harezek. So I'll say, you see from here that when it comes to truma, we're not choshesh lemisa, right? We assume that halacha lemaisa, he is in fact still alive. Or minhu, we'll raise the kasha we just brought up before. Right? Man gives his wife a get. Reuben gives Rachel a get, and he says to her, "This is your get that will take effect 1 hour, 1 moment before I die." What's the halacha? Asura le'echol b'truma miyad. She can't eat truma immediately. So we'll say, what do you see from that case? We are choshesh l'misa. So we'll say, so now the Gemara says, fine. Even if you want to take get out of the equation, take get out. Even in truma itself, we have a contradiction. right? Case number one that we've got, case in the Mishnah said that if Reuven is married to Rachel, Reuven is a Kohen, Rachel eats Truma, Reuven goes overseas, Rachel can continue to eat Truma based on the fact that Reuven is still alive. Case number two, Reuven gives Rachel a get. This is your get 1 moment before I die. What does the Gemara say? Rachel has to stop eating Truma now. So you see, we are choshesh for death. So we'll say, that's in Truma. That's in Truma. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, Amar Rav Adabraid Rav Yitzchak, Shiny Hasam. So we'll say, it could be the case is different over here. Why? Shari Asra Alav Shah Achas Kodem Misasa. So we'll say, this is very interesting. Let's say, maybe the case over here, by where he gives her a get and says, this will be your get 1 moment before I die. We'll say that maybe this case is different. Why? Why? Because the husband created it. Others will say, maybe there's a difference between just like general life realities versus created realities. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Shiny Hasam Shari Astra Sha'achas Kodem Misasa. So Rashi says over here, the Olam Lo Chashina Lemisa. And we'll say, people will say like this, in general, we're not choshesh from this. In other words, we'll say in general, we assume that people are alive until we have a chazaka otherwise. That's the general rule. So I'll say, so what about this case? So let's remember again, what's the case that's bothering us? The case that's bothering us is Reuven goes over to Rachel, Reuven's a Kohen, he goes over to Rachel, what does he do? He gives her a get, and what does he say to her? This get will be chal 1 hour before I die. What's the halacha, Rabbi say? What's the halacha? He can't eat truma. She can't eat truma now. What are we concerned about? He's going to die. That he's going to die, and then it turns out that retroactively she was eating truma at a time that she was already divorced from a Kohen. So the Gemara says, you see from this case that we are choshesh that people die. We're choshesh that people die. So Rashi says there's something very interesting. Maybe not. Maybe in general, we're not choshesh that people die. No. V'shayni hacha. We'll say it's different over here. Shari asra mechayim shah achas kodem misaso. So we'll say this is a different case because what is Reuven doing? Reuven ultimately, we'll say, is creating Isser not in death, right? We'll say what he's doing is he's creating Isser during life, right? We'll say, remember again, what happens when Reuven dies? What happens when Reuven dies? It triggers the get when he was alive. So I will say, interestingly enough, this is not a death-related Isser. This is actually a life-related Isser. It happens to be that death triggers the get, but the get actually takes place when Reuven's still alive. So the Isser is not created with Reuven's death. The Isser is really retroactively created when Reuven himself is still alive. He says, he goes, V'chol shaita ikalas abuke, bahi shaita shasida le'aser, v'shinui d'chikul. So we'll say, so therefore, again, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is something really fascinating, that you're not really comparing similar cases. It's not the pshat. We'll say, Rashi will say in general, we're not choshesh that people die. We'll say, but I know that sounds strange. People die all the time. Everybody dies. But what it means is that we're not choshesh when people die is, we assume that if someone initiated a process, that they do not die mid-process. And you could go ahead and finish up the process under the assumption that the maker, right, the principal, is still alive. Right? That's really what it means. And I will say, the Gemara says this is a different kind of case, because over here, the ramification ultimately, again, I will say, is not when Reuven dies in the Truma case, right, by the get in the Truma. The ramification is not where he dies. The ramification ultimately, again, is when he's still alive. It's true that death maybe triggers the get, but Lamaisa, the ramification of his T'nai is retroactively felt during his lifetime and not in his death. So therefore, I both say the cases themselves aren't really comparable. It's pretty amazing. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Gemara says, here's the problem. Good. Maskef Papa. First of all, Papa says, here's the problem. I'll say, Mimai, Di'ihu Ma'is Beresha, first wide line, Tilma Ihi Ma'is Beresha. We'll see now the Gemara says, by the way, let's talk about that Truma case for just a second, right? Where Reuven is a Kohen, he gives Rachel a get. He says, this get is chal 1 hour before I die. So what's the halacha? She can't eat Truma even now. To which the Gemara says, Shabbos says, Surah Papa raised a different kasha. Why should this case be a problem? We'll say the case presupposes that who's dying first? Who's dying first? Ruvain. Maybe Rachel's going to die first. Right? How do you know that Ruvain dies first? El Amar Abaye lo Kashya, Harabi Meir lo Chayesh Lemisa, Harabi Hudu Chayesh Lemisa. Oh, so we'll say, now the Gemara does a 180. The Gemara says, in reality, this whole thing is a fundamental machlokes. See, I will say, the concept of whether or not we are choshesh for Misa. So I will say, right, we wanted to say that based on the Mishnah, we hold lo chayshinan lemisa. I will say, so just let's define our term. Lo chayshinan lemisa doesn't mean that we're not choshesh that people die. We're choshesh that people die. Rather, I will say, what it means is, lo chayshinan lemisa means that if there is a process, ultimately, again, we assume that the parties involved in that process remain alive throughout the duration of the process. Now, let's say, by the way, I just want to, right, that's what we're assuming. Let's say, I just want to point out just something interesting. According to the Mishnah, the ramification of saying that the people involved in a process ultimately, again, remain alive throughout the process is the way Chazal tell us that you have the ability to finish whatever you start. So you know how often in life it happens? Maybe you have a friend like this who starts stuff and never finishes it. Right? So I'll say, so a lot of times, it's not me, but I know someone like that, right? Who does that, right? Chronically, right? Does that, right? Habitually. So I'll say, so now what's interesting to see is if you notice from the statement of Chazal, the fact that we say that Chazak is people remain alive until the completion of a process, is another way of Chazal saying you have the ability to finish whatever you start. And if you don't finish, more often than not, it's not because of circumstances, but it's because of me. So now what the Gemara is saying is maybe in reality, that principle that we thought everyone subscribed to is in fact a machlokes. Incredible. Maybe the machlokes, maybe there is a machlokes of chayshinan lemisa or lo chayshinan lemisa. Do we have to be concerned that people die or not? So we'll say, now watch this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir de lo chayish lemisa, Rabbi Huda de chayish lemisa. Rabbi Meir holds, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that we're not choshesh for death, and Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that we are choshesh for death. Now we'll say, now where did that come from? We'll say, listen to this. We've actually had this case a number of times throughout our journeys in Shas. Halokeach yayin mi ben akusim. We'll say, here we go. You buy kusi wine. Don't do it. It probably has a screw top, right, and everything like that. Okay, you know who you are, right? So let's say, listen to this. So let's say, so now what happens? You buy wine from the kusim. Now let's say, here's the issue. What's the halacha if you buy kusi wine? You have to tithe it, right? Because kusim don't have a ne'amanos that they take proper trumas and maestros from wine. So Rabbi says, what do you have to do? You have to tithe it. The case in question, Rabbi says, so if you could imagine, you bought yourself a wine skin of kusi wine. He'll say, you don't have the kalim now to separate out trumas and maestros. So remember again, to separate out truma, I'd have to pour something in. Right now, I don't have another kli, which is actually interesting, because what does that tell you? How are you consuming your kusi wine? Right from the wineskin, right? No better way, right from the wineskin. So we'll say, but over here, I don't have kalim with which to separate out trumas and maestros. So we'll say, so what do I do? So watch this. Omer, shnei lugin shani asala hafish harin truma, asara meiser rishon, tisha meiser sheni. So we'll say, what do? I make a declaration. The 2 lugin that I'm going to in the future separate should be truma. 10 should be meiser rishon, 9 should be meiser sheni, umeichel v'shos mi'adir. So what Rabbi Meir holds that you could verbally designate some of the wine in the wineskin as future tithes that I'm going to go ahead and separate out. Okay? Without what? Actually separating it. Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Osrin. Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon say that it's aser. Now we'll say, now take a quick look before you turn the page. Rashi says why? Shema yibaka hanod. Now we'll say, what are they concerned about? They're concerned that the wine skin is going to split. And what? The wine is going to be lost. So I will say, interestingly enough, the concern about the wine skin splitting and breaking and the wine being lost is the same thing as saying what? Shema Yamos. right? A concern. Well, in other words, what the Gemara is suggesting over here, and this is actually quite amazing, what the Gemara is suggesting is that maybe halacha l'maisa, the same opinions, i.e. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Huda, and Rabbi Yossi, you hold that you cannot go ahead and designate tithes in the wineskin without separating them, out of a concern that maybe the skin is going to split, the wine is going to be lost, would be the same opinions that hold that halacha l'maisa, we have to be concerned that people die. That even when you initiate a process, you cannot assume that the maker, the principal, is still alive either. So the Gemara says, well, interesting alignment of concepts. Rava Amar, so Rava says, Rava says, Shema on the base, Shema meis lo chashinan, Shema yamos chashinan. So I will say, this is actually very interesting. So Rava wants to give a different taich on this. Rava says, there's really two different things. Shema meis lo chashinan. That someone died already, that we're not choshesh for. Shema yamos, that something will happen in the future, that we are choshesh for. Now what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says over here, Shema meis lo chashinan, top Rashi, chav ches on the base. Du'okminon achas kaso, shenichu chai. The gabe koin shalchum dinas hayam, kevin shelo girsha inan ne'aseres, ela im kein meis. So we'll say, now listen to this. Essentially what the Gemara wants to suggest, what Rava wants to suggest is, there's two kinds of cases. So we'll say, for example, let's use Rashi's case over here. Right? Reuven's married to Rachel. So we'll say, so now, what's occurring? Reuven goes ahead and gives Rachel a get. Right? No, I take that back, sorry. Reuven goes ahead and goes overseas, right? Reuven's a Kohen. So up until now, right, Rachel's consuming Truma. Now Rashi says, what happens? So Reuven goes overseas. So we'll say, so now what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said Rachel could continue to go ahead and eat Truma. Why, I will say? Because halacha l'maisa, when they part ways, it's almost like reality is frozen. And I will say, what does reality say? The way we part ways, that concretizes and solidifies reality until we know definitively otherwise. And therefore, Rachel could continue to eat Truma because we're not choshesh that Reuven died. I will say that's what it means when it says Shema meis lo chashinan. At the end of the day, in other words, we don't assume that the reality that was solidified at the time that we parted ways, that's the reality that remains until we know definitively otherwise. Fine. So listen to this. Aval, Zushinasan laget, al menash yachol sha'achas kodem lemisaso, l'shem yamus miyat vade chashinan, delo morale chazakabachi. So I'll say, here's the difference. When Setsim Reuven gives Rachel a get, and he says to her, the get is chal when? An hour before I will die. And we'll say, so what do we say? Rachel, you can't eat truma anymore. Right? Why? Because we're choshesh that he's going to die in the future. See, I will say, that has nothing to do with preservation of a past chazaka. Rather, what does that have to do? With a potential future reality. Well, potential future, I will say, there is no chazaka on the future. It's incredible. There's no chazaka on the future. Right? Because the future is unknown. So if you're hinging everything on the future, well, at the end of the day, there's no chazaka on the future, and therefore we have to assume that maybe he's going to die, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, she can't eat truma anymore. I will say, isn't this fascinating? Essentially, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Chazaka says, we could lock in the past reality as a reality, ultimately until it changes, until we know otherwise. Right? The moment you start tying tonight to the future is totally unknown. So in the future, Abosai, all bets are off. So isn't this fast? So one more time. When Reuven is a Kohen, he goes overseas, Rachel could continue to go and eat Truma. Why? Because what the halacha says is, Shema meis lo chashinan. Their reality is locked in at the time they parted ways. That's what Chazaka does. Chazaka says, your present and your future is the same as your past until we know otherwise. We're talking about circumstantial. Do we know otherwise? So we'll say, and therefore she could continue to eat Truma. But the moment that Reuven says, listen, this is your get an hour before I die. So we'll say, now what he's doing is he's tying tonight into the future. The future, again, I know what's going to be in the future. So he's going to die tomorrow. Is he going to die the next day? Is he going to die in 5 years from now? So because ultimately we don't know the future, and that's what he's tying this tonight to, ultimately she can't eat truma as of now. So we'll say it's such a fascinating distinction. Shema meislo chashinon, shema yamos chashinon. Ultimately, again, that he did die, i.e., to change the past reality. The Chazaka says we're not choshesh for a change in past reality until we know otherwise. But Shema Yamos, you want to legislate about the future. We'll say the future is a great honor. We'll say, and by the way, such a profound Musar Haskell. In other words, we'll say, really what we're saying is, I can go ahead and live my present based on the Chazakas of the past. I can't live my present based on the Chazakas of the future. Right? I was say, what a profound yesod. What a profound yesod. There's absolutely no way to know what the future holds. And therefore, if you link the present reality to the future, then the truth is all bets are off. There's no way for us to navigate in that. So therefore, our default, by definition, is to be machmir. In this particular case, what that'll mean is she can't eat truma. But if you link a reality to the chazak of the past, then ultimately, again, you're good to go. But that's not true. What about the case of the wineskin? So I'll say the case of the wineskin is like a case of a future possibility, right? Shema Yamos, and yet there's still a machlokes. Amar Yehuda midiskarta shiny nud the afshad the masulei l'shomer. The wineskin is different. Why? Because halacha l'mais you could always give it over to a shomer who's going to watch it. Maskev ram misharshia arvech arvatzarach, really? So who's going to watch it for the person who's watching it? In other words, what are you talking about? That you can give over the wineskin to someone to watch it, as if that could prevent the wineskin ever breaking? That's not true. Therefore, Rabbi say, what Rava comes out, it says like this: Shema Meis. So Rabbi say, the concept as espoused in our Mishnah, namely, that when you take leave of someone, and when you left that person, they were alive. What does the halacha say? What does the halacha say? The chazaka says they remain alive. Now, Rabbi say, I will point. Well, fine. I will say Shema Yamos. Once you go ahead and create it tonight, that is tethered to some unknown future reality, then we have to be choshesh for all possibilities. And in that case, halacha l'maisa, shema yamos, we have to be choshesh that someone will die in the future, you create a future reality, that's a machlokes tanoim. We'll say very profound. Now, I will point out that obviously there will be exceptions to the shema meis lo chashinan rule also, the cheskas chai rule. I will say, if the husband is a goses, that's a different kind of discussion, right? So we'll talk about that. Because again, obviously, we'll say if the husband is a goses, then what does that do? That erodes the chazaka. In other words, we'll say it would be foolish to say that if the husband is a goses, no, there's a chazaka that he's alive. No, he's not, because there's a rov. We'll say, what does the rov say? The rov says rov goses in lamisa, right? The majority, ultimately, again, of people who are goses, unfortunately, die. So again, we'll get to that. But I will say, but we emerge with a very powerful principle. And the powerful principle is that ultimately, so two different things I will say. When dealing with reality, right, in the present reality, we could say that whatever the chazaka was up until this point, that is the chazaka that is locked in. That's the chazaka that is locked in, and we can navigate going forward based on that chazaka. So therefore, again, right, Kohen husband goes overseas, wife could continue to go ahead and eat truma, because we assume that the present reality that has existed until now is a present reality which will remain. Conversely, husband says, this is your get 1 hour before I die. She has to stop eating truma now. Why? Because we have no idea what the future brings. And I will say that Shema Yamos, that's going to be a machlokes time, what we do with that. I will say, what's the Musar Haskell for us? I will say, don't spend too much time trying to predict the future. Because I will say, here's what's incredible. What happens if you go ahead and you spend too much time focusing on the future? What does it lead to? I will say, what does it lead to? Paralysis. I will say, what happens to the woman whose husband ties her reality to the future? She can't eat truma, right? Not eating is inaction, paralysis, right? When all you're focused on is what's going to be or what could potentially be, so the mice, again, the only reality then that leads to is an inability ultimately to act, right? On the other hand, halacha l'maisa, when a person is much more focused on the present focus ultimately allows a person to continue to navigate, to continue to live, to continue to create. Incredible. Well, so let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Sholeach Hatas Medinas Hayam. However, I think if we daven in here, this is going to be a women's section. So I would, I think if any. All right. So you want to say sitting? Oh.
It's okay.
Daniel said he's fine.
Fantastic. Good. You know what? One more time. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, yeah, please. Hasholeach Hatas Medinas Hayam. So we'll say, let's go weiter. Thank you. We're still okay, right? Okay. Hasholeach Hatas Medinas Hayam. So we'll say, ultimately, again, a person goes in and sends his chatas from Medinas Hayam. So the Gemara says as follows: V'hava ina smicha. But 1 second, I will say, but here's the problem. The Gemara says, forget about whether or not we could assume that the owner of the carbon is still alive. Isn't there a secondary issue? I will say that a carbon requires smicha, right? The carbon requires leaning on the carbon. To which the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef, the carbon nashim, talking about the carbon of a woman. The Gemara says, so a woman's carbon does not require smicha. Does not require smicha. So the Gemara says, Rashi says over here, Isha sheshagaga bekari seshulcha chatasa. Woman's chatas doesn't require smicha. Papa amar bechatasa oath. Ultimately, or it's the chata, a bird offering. Bird offering also doesn't require smicha. Utzvicha. I will say the truth is, I need all of these cases. Why? And I will say that here's what's interesting. In the Mishnah, you essentially have 3 cases that all espouse the same principle. Right? Case number 1 is the sending of a get. Case number 2 is the consumption of truma. Case number 3 is the sending of a carbon. I will say all 3 cases utilize the same principle, which is what? Cheskas chai. That ultimately, again, the chazak is that people remain alive and don't die. So why do you need 3 cases to illustrate the same principle? Mar says, you need them. I will tell you why. Get. If we would have just said the case of get mishum dula efshar, because I will say if you don't subscribe to a chazaka that a person remains alive, it is you are unable to ever send a get to the shaliach. Aval truma de efshar imalo. But Shuma Rabbi was saying maybe we assume the husband died because again she could always eat other stuff. Truma, and if you'll say truma, the zimnin de lo efshar, will say there are times where all the woman has to eat is truma. Therefore, we have to assume that the husband is alive. Avachata self misveka lo leachul nazara. Maybe in the case of chata saof, we'll say out of suffix, don't allow an ownerless carbon to be offered up in the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, tzricha. Therefore, I'll say all of the cases ultimately again are necessary. Incredible. So Rabbi will say, bottom line, what emerges ultimately again from the Mishnah is we operate with a cheskas chai. We operate ultimately again with a present chazaka that if the owner, the maker, the husband was alive at the time the shlichos was concretized, ultimately again that is the chazaka which remains until we definitively know otherwise. Once you get into future Tanaim, Rabbi will say, then ultimately, again, that's going to be Machlokas Tanaim. Good, back to Mishnah. Shlosha Dvarim Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Parata L'fnei Chachamim. The Rabbi Elazar ben Parata said 3 things before the Chacham. Number 1, V'kam was Devarav. And they solidified or upheld his words. Number 1, Al Ir Shekifa Karkum. So I'll say about, listen to this, about a city that was besieged by an army. Valasfina Hamiturefes Bayam, or about a boat that was being, thrown around the seas, right? Va'al Hayotzi Lidon, and about someone who was being taken out to be judged for a capital case. Shein Becheskas Kayamin. But I say all of these people, a person in any of these 3 situations has a chazaka that he is still alive. So we'll say, so in other words, if you're in a city that is besieged, ultimately again a boat that is being tossed around the sea, or being taken out to be adjudicated for a capital crime, the chazaka is you're still alive. Aval, ir shekav shekarkum. But we'll say a person is in a city that was captured by a foreign army, usfina sha'avda bayam, or a boat ultimately again that has been lost at sea, or vayotzi lihare, or someone has been taken out to be executed. Nosnin alein chumrei chayim v'chumrei mesim. We'll say about such a person, we give them the chumras of being alive and being dead. We'll say, what are the chumras of being alive and being dead? Meaning, for example, Bas Yisrael, Kohen, Bas Kohen, Yisrael, Sokol B'Truma. So we'll say, in that case, let's say, if it was a Bas Yisrael married to a Kohen, she couldn't eat Truma. Or if it was a Bas Kohen married to a Yisrael, who didn't have children, she wouldn't be able to go back to her father's home under the assumption that her husband was dead as well. So we'll say, any Truma. So we'll say, so bottom line, so therefore, again, in these last 3 cases, where again, either the army went ahead and took over the city, the boat, let's say, was lost at sea, capsized, or ultimately, again, he was actually gone ahead and Yotze was actually taken out to be executed. In all of those three cases, we give them the chumras of living and dead people. Again, we'll see it in the Gemara. I'm Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says as follows: Lo shano. And I remember again in the last case in the Mishnah we said that a person who is being taken out to be executed is given the chumras of a person who's living and dead. In other words, there's still a shtickle safek. Rav Yosef says that's only true the Beis Din Shal Yisrael in a Jewish court, because we'll say in a Jewish court there is the possibility ultimately that what? That halacha l'maisa, maybe they'll find some zuchos, some right. What's the lashon zuchos? Some merit. Thank you. But source for exoneration, right? And overturn what?
Extenuating.
Yeah, and overturn the verdict. Aval bebeizin she'ovid kochavim. But I will say ultimately again in a Gentile court, kevan the gomer le dina liktala miktal kaklele. We'll say in a Gentile court, once they judged that ultimately, again, he is subject to the death penalty, ultimately they will carry out that execution without exception. That exception, fine. Amarle Abaye. So Abaye says, maybe not. So I'll say sometimes a Gentile court, they can be bribed. So because they can be bribed, ultimately, even if the guy has been sentenced and is being taken out, he still is not necessarily considered to be automatically like he's dead. Amarle said, no. Kishakli mikamei delachtum porsi shinmag. Lebasar de michsam porsi shinmag lo shakli. When do they accept bribes? Only before the verdict has been rendered. But once the verdict has been rendered, ultimately, again, they no longer accept any kind of bribes. I says the Gemara Meisvei kol makom shem. The Shabbos say. So therefore, again, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows: that halacha l'maisa, that Rav Yosef is suggesting that it's only in a Beis Din of Jews, where even if a guy is being led out to be executed, that halacha l'maisa, we still give him the chumras of this. If he's living as it means, there's still the possibility for the verdict to be overturned. But in a Beis Din of an akum, once the verdict has been delivered, at the end of the day, there's no going back. So Meisvei, kol makom sheyamdu shnayim v'yomru me'idin anu esish ploni shenigmar dino bebeis dino shel ploni uploni edav harei zeh hareg. Yet I will say we learned that whenever two people get up, right, and we'll say they testify, we testify that so and so had a capital verdict delivered. Right? He was sentenced to death in front of a particular Beis Din. And so, right, in particular Beis Din, so-and-so were his witnesses, that ultimately, again, we can go ahead and execute such an individual, to which the Gemara will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that even in a court, even in a Jewish court, halacha l'maisa, once the verdict has been delivered, we assume that there's no overturning it. Dilma boreach sheni. But say, could very well be that a guy who's running away from Beis Din, or say generally, innocent people don't run away from Beis Din. Right? So if you're running away, chances are that there was a guilty verdict delivered against you. Well, so you know what to do? We're going to stop over here for today. Will the Meretz Hashem pick up with this sugya? It's also incredible sugya ahead of us. Shkoyach.